Hey, gang, this week's episode is brought to you by oldschoolshirts.com. Hey, check them out. You like defunct teams and leagues and t-shirt form? Well, you'll find them there, but a whole bunch of other stuff, too. Do you remember a radio station of the past or perhaps a mall that you used to go to? All kinds of great cultural and sports memories can be found at the great folks at oldschoolshirts.com. Promo code GOODSEATS for 10% off all of your purchases. And now, here's our show.
Time remaining, 55 seconds. Spirit on top, 9-4. Looking for their second 10-goal game here tonight. Here's a long run, Tommy Mulroy. Mulroy all alone. Mulroy tees it up, he scores. Tommy Mulroy, short-handed goal for Hartford.
Something we said we've got to be really careful of on the power play. It's important that top man gets back with any breaking player. Mulroy finds so much space to go forward. There we see the recovering defender, just Peter Manos to beat. Strikes the ball clinically and well to Manos' left, diving low, but can't get down to save Mulroy's shot.
He really hit that ball.
He played very, very well over it and struck it very, very well top of the ball. Good shot by Tommy Mulroy, an ex-Pittsburgh Spirit.
Mulroy's first goal. Play right out front. 30 seconds remaining in the fourth quarter. So Mulroy gets his first goal of the season. McKenzie inside. Oh, it just hits the crossbar again. Finally, Charbonneau cleans it out. McKenzie to McNichol. Time running down. It's just a matter now what Pittsburgh's going to win by, as they are going to walk away with their fourth straight victory, a club record, and a great tribute to Coach Lenny Billis, as he has the Spirit on a winning way. That's the end of the game. The final score, the Pittsburgh Spirit 9, the Hartford Hellions 5. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
All right. Let's get going, shall we? How are you? My friends, it's Good Seats Still Available. Yeah, it's the podcast that you hopefully know by now is devoted to what used to be in professional sports. It's our little weekly excursion into many things forgotten in the realm of pro sports, and we thank you for finding us either for the first time or for a repeat visit. We appreciate it. We're bouncing back into soccer and a delightful conversation with a very intriguing character in the history of professional soccer, hell, soccer generally in this country, and I think emblematic of the twists and turns and the torturous history, especially in the modern game, of the sport in the United States. Our guest is Tom Mulroy, to some known as Soccer Tom or Tommy Mulroy, longtime advocate for the game, and we'll get into sort of the story as to how that passion has evolved over the decades. But like many in the early days of the 1960s and 1970s, a blue-blooded American player finding his way, if you will, amongst this still relatively barren landscape in the United States when it came to this sport of soccer, largely domiciled by ethnic enclaves and a lack of appreciation or respect by the big American sports and the infrastructure of coaches and schools and that kind of stuff. But as you'll hear in this conversation, the journey for a lot of American soccer players through the 1970s and 1980s, I wouldn't call it lonely, but it was certainly a relatively small group of people who, for whatever reasons, found themselves in love with this sport of soccer, almost to the point of being proselytizing and or endorsers of or advocates for, or Pied Pipers, if you will. That's a term that applies very much to Tom Mulroy's career, both as player and beyond that. This is just a very intriguing conversation, and it's very, very representative of what many players of that era who went on to stick it out and ultimately become, if you will, the first generation of honest-to-goodness American-born stars. And we've talked to some of them in our previous conversations. Kyle Rote Jr., a really good example, among a myriad of others. But Tommy Mulroy, I think, is just indicative of the sort of stick-to-itiveness and the belief, despite many of the sort of social conventions against it in the sport of soccer, and a flame, if you will, it was kept, especially in the dark periods. We've talked about this too, the mid to late 1980s, when largely the NASL and even the MISL and indoors was kind of sort of faltering, and in the NASL's case, gone away, just poof, like that. And really sort of a nadir for anybody of this generation of player and believer that felt, frankly, kind of abandoned, because there wasn't a whole lot going on in the professional ranks, and the 1994 World Cup was not even on the horizon yet. And we all certainly know what's happened since then, MLS and USL and all kinds of other things, and an embarrassment of riches now. Still has plenty of problems, this pro soccer thing in the United States, but these are larger and modern type problems versus the existential ones that buffeted the sport for the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and early 90s for sure. Tom Mulroy is very representative of that time, and so many different layers to this conversation, and I'm excited to bring it to you in a few moments' time. But let's start with that clip to kind of sort of set things in motion, and I think itself a microcosm of our conversation. That was from a major indoor soccer league game in its second season with the Pittsburgh Spirit in their second season, and they were going to take a break the following season, and they came back in a sort of new reincarnated Spirit, if you will, the year after, but I digress. Against the Hartford Hellions. This was January 26th, 1980. Now, this was a local broadcast that aired in Pittsburgh. This was an away telecast. Terry Lewicki, the early voice of the MISL in the early years, you heard him and his two brothers. They were arguably the chief operating instigators of this MISL. Earl Foreman and Ed Tepper, the co-founders of the league. But in terms of the various franchises and promotional, Terry was especially somebody we'd love to have on this show, by the way, as one of any of the Lewicki brothers. But Terry's voice you would hear on many local broadcasts, and even in some early national telecasts in places like the USA Cable Network, et cetera, along with Paul Wright, who was the color commentator. And that was in the Springfield Civic Center, where, if you remember, this is around the time the Hartford Whalers of the now in the NHL at that time and the Hellions had to kind of dance around the renovation of the collapsed roof from the Hartford Civic Center. So a lot of games for both of those franchises were in the Springfield Civic Center that season. The Hellions also played in the New Haven Coliseum as well in their that first season of theirs. So an inauspicious debut, but again, also emblematic because, as you heard there at the end of that particular game, another loss by the Hellions, which was pretty commonplace for both of their seasons before they moved to Memphis the following after that 2-year run. Tommy Mulroy was in the midst of all of that, and in that case, scoring a shorthanded goal. That was his first of that first season for the Hellions, but just one of the many stops. And again, this is emblematic of what soccer players of that ilk, that era. We're talking, like in this case, the mid to late 1970s, early 1980s, through the 80s for that matter, to make a go out of it, to be a professional in the United States. And the Hartford Hellions playing indoors was, and the MISL was a new sort of lifeline for a lot of soccer players who were trying to make ends meet by playing in the NASL outdoors, or in the case of Tommy, not only having played in the NASL, but also in the ASL, the American Soccer League, which at that time was pretty much a Division II plus, if you will, professional league, in certain markets where the NASL was not, and thriving as well. But this is a great example of sort of the various franchise roulette, if you will, that many players had to play. And in the case of Tom, the notion of playing outdoors, in his case with the ASL, teams like the Cleveland Cobras and the New York Eagles, later the Fort Lauderdale Sun, but then playing indoors during the quote-unquote off-season, in essence, enabling a full-time, full-season, full year's worth of play and the checks that come with that. Pittsburgh Spirit being his team that first year of the MISL, the Hellions, as we just mentioned. But then even the New York Arrows and the New York Express, the ill-fated New York Express, and even the AISA, if you remember that, the second division, if you will, of indoor soccer with the ultimate champions in 1987, the Louisville Thunder. All of those teams are places that Tommy played. And even in more interestingly, which is kind of where we start his professional journey, was his first ever season as a professional, playing in the North American Soccer League with a team known as the Miami Toros. Now, if you remember the Toros, they were the predecessor to what became the Fort Lauderdale Strikers. Interesting stories there. But as we'll hear in our conversation, the gelling of the fact that Tom Mulroy was a professional soccer player in 1976 in the top tier in the United States itself was a story. And you'll hear his background story, how he became not only a professional over time, but frankly, the challenges that he overcame in his youth, not just from the soccer ain't played here kind of thing dynamic. That's just pales by comparison to the personal story and his upbringing and that kind of stuff. And people taking a chance on him and helping him, trying to sort of figure out what a pro career, whatever that could be, in soccer in the United States. And it's all encapsulated in a book, of course, that we're going to promote for you right this very moment. And the cover of this book is crystallizes it too. It's called 90 Minutes with the King, How Soccer Saved My Life. And on this cover, Soccer Tom Mulroy is pictured defending behind a sprightly looking Pele playing for the New York Cosmos in 1976. Mulroy's on this Miami Toros team. It is a picture from a game in Yankee Stadium where the Cosmos were playing their home games that season. And that picture just encapsulates it. You'll see it. We'll post it on the socials, and you'll see it all along for the promotion of this show. But it's a pinch me moment for Tom Mulroy in that, just a handful of years prior, here was a guy, fumphering his way through community college, playing soccer, not doing so well in school, not really sure what he was going to be or do with his life. And here he is on the stage of one of the more famous stadiums in American sports history, playing against arguably at the time and since the world's most famous and greatest player. Interestingly, where that player, Pele, scored one of his most memorable professional goals ever, something I'm sure Tommy doesn't necessarily want to remember, but certainly was an important part of American soccer, a beautiful bicycle kick, one of the very few that Pele ever achieved in a pro game, was done on that stage, on that surface against Tom Mulroy and the Miami Toros of that year. But this is a journey about the beautiful game, about how Tom embraced that game and the game embraced him back. And frankly, not just all those ports of call that we'll get into, which is obviously the excuse for our conversation, but what it's helped him do since. And there, like I said before at the outset, there is no more passionate purveyor of this sport. I said the term Pied Piper. That is, somewhat flippantly an appropriate term for Tom, because in his professional life, promoting the game, professional through the World Cup of 1994, literally going and helping with community activity, getting kids interested in the game, various pro journeys and teams, helping marketers discover the sport, things that we frankly take for granted today as professional soccer has become such a gigantic part of the American sports landscape. That wasn't the case in the 70s and 80s when he was playing. And it certainly wasn't the case in the 90s and the aughts when it was still very much early days, if you will, for the American sports psyche to include soccer as one of its own. A fascinating, wonderful, and thoroughly enjoyable conversation coming up with our new pal, Tom Mulroy, as we discuss his life both on and off the field and with the sport of soccer. Again, the book is called 90 Minutes with the King, How Soccer Saved My Life. It is available wherever you can find good books. And of course, if you search up this episode on our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Episode number 333, easy to remember. You will find a few convenient links that will take you to the hardcover or the Kindle version of said book, and you will enjoy it thoroughly, as hopefully you will this upcoming conversation. So here it is. Let's waste no more time. Here's our chat that we had with the great Soccer Tom Mulroy. We had just before the holidays. Please sit back and enjoy. As always, our pleasure to bring it to you. Let's start from the beginning, because I actually grew up in the northern New Jersey, Bergen County area. So tell us and our audience where you grew up, and perhaps a little bit of how you stumbled into this soccer thing in your youth. And then maybe we'll get into the granular nitty-gritty stuff of all the other professional things.
Yeah, well, I'm a New York City kid. My mom and dad met in New York when they were kids and married their high school sweethearts, what have you. It's all in the book. But then we moved out. There was a big move out to the suburbs, and my mom and dad got divorced, and I moved to the suburbs with my mom to Rockland County, which is right outside of New York City, just over the Tappan Zee Bridge, or a border town to New Jersey with Bergen County. So not too far away. We were neighbors. And back then it was typical American stuff. So we played Ringalivio, hide and seek, all of those kind of games. Played stickball, played tackle football on someone's front lawn, played basketball, played all the regular games. Soccer wasn't an option. Actually, when in gym class you had soccer, everybody was like depressed, like, oh my God, we got to play this game. You can't touch the ball with your hands, so on. So that's where soccer was in the world. If you played soccer at that time, you either spoke funny because you just arrived from somewhere else, or you got cut from the football team. And this was in the 60s. And somehow the kid that lived across the street from me, his name was Paulie Bianco. His dad ran the Spring Valley Bar and Restaurant, not far from where we lived, a couple miles up the road. And he was an old Italian guy, and it was a typical bar and grill, his Italian food specials, blah, blah. Well, at that time, Rockland County was being built, it was really expanding, all the new houses, everybody moving to the burbs. And the people building the houses, doing the construction, were ethnics. They were, Germans and Austrians and Norwegians and what have you. And there was a big need for a soccer team, for an adult soccer team. And this, my friend's father, Bianco, he sponsored the Spring Valley men's soccer team. And they were playing in the German American League, which at that time was really the place to play. If you were in the Northeast, it was pretty much the highest level of soccer going on. If you look back to all the amateur cups, a lot of the cups were won from teams by there, the German Hungarians, the Greek Americans, so forth. And they were pretty much, in some cases, professional. All the players got paid, and they represented their community. And at some point, they wanted to grow soccer. And so they said, look, it's going to cost whatever, twice as much to register your men's team if you don't have a kids team in our league. So at the time, my friend Paulie and I used to go to his, I say work, but we didn't really work. We used to go to his bar and restaurant on the weekends. We were really being babysat. And we'd make some pizza downstairs, flatten out the dough or what have you. And so we knew the guys that played because they came to the bar and restaurant after practices and after games on the weekend. He had showers downstairs. He sponsored the uniforms, so that's where they always came. And it was typical of a small town in any country in Europe or in South America, for that matter. And they sponsored the team. And so I wound up getting connected through that. They didn't have enough of their own kids. And I got recruited. And I remember my first day, we went there, I was in a pair of jeans and high top sneakers playing soccer. And I thought, this is stupid. But my buddy Paulie and all these guys with the funny names that I couldn't understand what they were saying, even though it was English, got me hooked. And that was it. I fell in love.
So it was almost like one of those enclave kind of scenarios, not unlike, well, maybe a lesser version, if you will, or a lighter version of, say, what was happening in Kearney, which is more of a concentrated, zone of soccer and ethnic stuff. But arguably, right, in the late 60s, early 70s, right, this is indicative, and you had to look very hard around various parts of the country to sort of see these little pockets. Actually, there are probably more of them than we probably admitted, but they just weren't, they weren't connected, right? They were very loosely understood, or they were very regional, and there was no sort of semblance of the potential connectivity of that activity, right? So in some respects, it's almost like you're in a vacuum, right?
Yeah, exactly, and especially because if you think about the cultures, the Germans read the German Stadt, right, like one paper, and then the Greeks had their own Greek paper, and so it was even more cut in pieces than, for example, later on when the Hispanics came to the United States, right? So, like, even now, the club that I was with, Blau-Weiß Gotchi, that mainly had German, Austrian, kids from Europe, now their teams are full with Latinos, Ecuadorians, Argentinians, but you know what? They all read the same newspaper. They all watch Univision or Telemundo, right? So there was a way to connect the dots a lot easier than you're reading your German paper and I'm reading my Yugoslavian paper, right? So yeah, to your point, we were in a vacuum. It was almost like, what are those guys over there doing,
How are you picking up the game, so to speak? How do you sort of I guess alight to the nuances of this, if you will, foreign sport? Because it's one thing to sort of be corralled and recruited. It's quite another to actually be interested in, and maybe even sort of think you've got some level of talent to play with these probably more advanced skill set kids.
Well, one of the things was Paulie and I were kind of the oldest kids in our neighborhood. So we kind of like, all right, we're doing basketball today, right? And or we're doing this. And so we started to take it from where we went and met the other families, a couple towns over in Clarkstown. We met the other families, the other Germans, Austrians, whatever, Yugoslavians would bring their kids, and we'd meet twice a week for practice. Well, we'd go home, and now it became one of the activities on our list in the neighborhood, whether the other kids liked it or not. And then they started, listen, it's a game you fall in love with. You don't need to be big. You don't need to be strong. So long as your feet reach the ground, you can play. And, we all started to like and enjoy it more. And it became a priority for me, actually, for a lot of the kids in the neighborhood. Later on down the road, many of them also from my neighborhood, very much like Kearney, almost like Kearney had their guys, the Scots and the English and those guys in their neighborhood. And in our neighborhood, it was, the Germans, the what have you. The unusual thing really was that I was an American. So somehow I got pulled into it, not by a parent. So my mom didn't know a soccer ball from a golf ball, right? And no one brought me to soccer. Soccer brought me to soccer. And most of the kids I played with, my friend Nicky Megaludis, he tells a story of his dad. He lived in Astoria. His dad would wake him up at 5:30 in the morning to go train because he wanted him to be a pro. And he'd go, Nicky's name was Nufrius in Greek. And he goes, Nufrius, Nufri, come on, we're going to training. They were in a 2-bedroom apartment with 5 kids. Nicky kind of leans up from the bed and pulls the shade away from the window. He looks he goes, Dad, it's snowing. He goes, they train under the bridge, under the Triborough Bridge. You took him to train, right? So So I did not have that kind of influence of bringing me to the game. My mom didn't know anything. My family didn't know anything about soccer. So I was like a real gringo, if you will.
So describe then high school and then into college and stuff, because it's clear that you were not only sort of interested in the game, you were picking up some skills and becoming quite good at it. That doesn't happen either by accident either. There's some level of passion or interest or belief on your own, as you're just describing, right? That I can get better. I enjoy this. I'm decently good at it. Sort of describe that process in college, because obviously in college is where you start to get a little bit of acclaim, I guess, for your play and getting onto some other people's radars outside of your hometown.
Sure. Well, it became like an obsession. I guess my first year playing, it was my birthday, the first game. I had been playing like 2.5 weeks. We had a game and I was 12. And by the time the next year came around, I was practicing hours every day. And the coach made me a captain. And it was like, it almost like transformed me. My, my older brother was heading down the wrong road and I was right in the back seat with him heading that way. And soccer kind of grabbed me and pulled me out of the car, put me on the new road. We were sniffing glue. We were robbing cars. And soccer, the guy made me captain, and it was like life-changing. His name was Soutner, and we were the only youth team north of New York City, like over the Tappan Zee Bridge. Forget it. At that time, only in the city, in the ethnic neighborhoods, and Long Island was just starting at that time too. And there was a movie theater up the road from my house. It was called Cinema 45. And one day, I started taking my ball with me wherever I went. I mean, the coach was like, "You're gonna have the ball with you all the time. So the back of the movie theater didn't have any windows. So one day when I was walking up to Hillcrest, I started kicking the ball off the wall, and I was like, "Wow, this is great." And then all of a sudden, a couple of the guys we met, we were playing there, and then the place had lights. So we went from playing on someone's lawn that ended when the lights went on to playing all night. So I'd go there and the coach would say, Tommy, want to go play? You need to kick the ball 500 with the right and 1,000 with the left, right? So I'd literally go to the wall and rank it off the wall left and right. I used to be able to throw a tennis ball off of a wall and head it back and forth hundreds of times without it hitting the ground. Because I spent so much time by myself, mainly because it wasn't easy to find a game or someone to train with. So if you wanted to be a good player, it had to be like an individual discipline where you kind of did it yourself. And then, in high school, I actually, my first school experience was a junior high. We were playing in gym class, and they had these brown balls. There were no goals. There were no mini goals. They had nets that they put on the bottom of a football goal post, that always had the bars above it. That was it. There were none of these millions of goals laying all over the fields. So you'd come to gym class and they'd put 2 big orange cones on one end, 2 big orange cones on the other end, and then they'd send you off and everybody would kick each other to pieces in gym class, right? No one was controlling the ball. No one. And I happened to have great junior high teachers in the gym class. They were mentors, a guy by the name of Mazaris and Bloom. And I guess they saw me, here I am a year after I've been playing with the club, training 3 days a week, training on my own. And there's the kids just kicking the ball around. And all of a sudden I'm bringing it down, making turns, knocking balls in with both feet. So they call me over and they go, "Where did you learn how to do it?" Like, "Hey, what, you don't have an accent." I was like, "Yeah." And they go, "Where'd you learn?" I said, "I played with the Spring Valley boys team." It was, "What is that?" It was so new. No one even knew about it except the ethnic community. So anyway, they said, why aren't you on this school team? And I was like, the school has a team. It was like a big revolution to me that there even was a team, which now gave me another reason to go to my classes, to be on time, to what. And then in high school, I played in my high school, it was 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. So I played at Ramapo Senior High School, and I was an all-county immediately as a sophomore. And I just got more and more involved. I played the German American League All-Stars. I mean, I couldn't get enough of it. I literally, while I was writing the book, one of the guys helping me, William Dorella, who was kind of one of the people that I kind of bounced ideas off. He goes, you keep saying how many hours you trained, how much, you got to quantify that. So we went back and I called friends, and when I used to train an average of 40 to 60 hours a week, depending if I had school or not. So, and most of those hours were on my own because the team, only trained a couple of days a week, but then you have the junior high team, the high school or school team, and then you have so I was kind of obsessed, and
did you ever ask yourself why you became so obsessed? Was it because you thought that was quote unquote a ticket out of some of the things you were being diverted to earlier in your youth? Or did you think you had maybe inklings of becoming, making a career out of this? Or was it just more a distraction? Or was it just you fell in love with the game and it was just something you wanted to do in all your waking hours?
Well, the ethnic guys all followed the World Cup before anybody in our country knew about the World Cup. You couldn't even get it on, the first World Cup I ever kind of watched.
The Felt Forum in Madison, under Madison Square Garden with, it's a closed circuit. This is crazy.
That's where you had to go. And that, in 1970, they didn't even really have that, I don't think. Maybe they did, but I was too young. I didn't go. But in 74, I went to Madison Square Garden exactly to watch the entire World Cup on closed circuit TV. In 1970, we had, back then you had black and white TV. They had the ears on top of the TV. And we just came home from church and we're watching. My uncle's trying to help us get it on his TV. And it was before Univision, right? Before there was a
SAENA, right? Tony Torado and the SAENA, Spanish
exactly.
Right. Yeah.
And we're trying to get it to come in because, we're upstate. So it's not like you're in the city and it's coming in clear, which is there. And it's like, Pele. And then you hear everybody cheering. I'm like, Pele. And everybody knew this guy, Pele, right? And he's the only one we kind of knew. It isn't like now and everybody has the social media and the international clubs are promoting the kids and wherever. So it was like everybody knew Pele. So everybody wanted to be Pele. And he inspired me. He was kind of my North Star. And I really, wanted to be a professional player, which was a little weird because there really wasn't a professional league at that time. It was just starting. The New York Generals, before they were the Cosmos, and there was all of that was happening. But again, it was like outside of mainstream, and certainly outside of mainstream in American family. But I wanted to be a professional player. By the time I got to high school, I kind of, in my own mind, didn't feel like I was trying to be the best player on my team or in the county. I felt like there was a kid in Rio de Janeiro or in Berlin that woke up in the morning and they were going to try to out-train me. And I was trying to train harder and become better than them, right? So, at the time, I became a good juggler with the soccer ball. And people are like, today everybody can juggle. It's no big deal. There's a million guys that can do tricks and don't even really play soccer. But back then, it was because I didn't have anyone to play with, right? That was most of the time, I was on my own. So beyond hitting the ball off the wall or kicking the ball through a goal that didn't have any nets, you could keep the ball up, work with your left foot, your right foot, hit it high, bring it low, whatever. So that's why I became so intense at my training. And then when it came to college, I wasn't a good student. I had a learning disability. At one point, when I went into a guidance counselor, he went, "What do you want to be?" And I went, "Well, I'm going to be." I was like saying to myself, "Doesn't this guy hear the announcements in the morning that I scored 2 goals and we beat the team and blah 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 in the school newspaper?" And I go, "I'm going to be a professional soccer player." And the guidance counselor ripped me a new one. He was like, "Every kid that walks through that door is going to be a professional basketball player, or Mick Jagger or whatever, right?" And I went home shattered. I mean, I was shattered. And when my mom said, "Something the matter?" And I go, and I figured, hey, she's an adult. All the adults think the same way, right? She's going to say the same thing. And my mom was actually mad. She was like, "I can't believe someone would ever tell you you couldn't be something you want. You can, if you put your mind to it and you put your heart in it, anybody can be whatever they want to be, and don't you ever let anybody tell you." And had she had a car and didn't have to walk to work 2 miles in the opposite direction, she probably would have went into school and had the guidance counselor's head. So she backed me. She was always there, and that was important to me.
So, okay, that's pretty, that's intestinal fortitude or being forged, if you will, right? So describe to me what professional soccer was in your mind, because this is the early 70s, right? So, you're mentioning they're really, we've talked ad nauseum about sort of the state of professional soccer in this country at that time, right? And at the beginning of the decade was hanging on a thread based on grand aspirations from the late 60s that just, basically fell completely apart and was slowly rebuilding. What did you even know of this quote unquote professional soccer thing? Was it all foreign lands maybe where this would be? Did you fancy you could play in the United States? Did you even fancy that it could be a way to even support yourself as a living, given what little was existing in the United States at that time?
Well, a couple of things. One, I didn't know I was poor until really I was playing professionally. Like even in college, I just never thought about it, right? And for example, I took my daughter back to where I lived when she was about 8, right? She's in college now, and 7 or 8. And I got out of the car and I parked in front of my old house on Pascack Road. And here's this 8-year-old looking, and I go, "That was Uncle Frank's house, and the Fuchses right there in the front. And see that little house in the back? That's where Poppy grew up. And this front lawn, that's where I learned to play soccer." And I was like proud. I got out of the car. You know what I mean? I'm like standing on someone's front lawn there, right? And my daughter looks at me and she goes, "Poppy, Grandma was really poor, wasn't she?" So I didn't know I was poor. I didn't care how much money I made. It wasn't about the money. My mom had taken me to a game to watch Santos of Brazil and West Ham United play in Randall's Island. So I did see a professional.
Was that an exhibition, or was that an international soccer league game?
It was an international exhibition game.
Got it.
And having, over the years, I have operated and ran teams like that with my company, like Germany versus Argentina, or Bayer Leverkusen versus the Honduran national, whatever. So I did that. So I've been in the industry, and looking back, this was 1970, September, right? Because my mom took me for my birthday. And what happened was when the promoters went and rented Randall's Island, the city had no idea that 20,000 plus people would show up for somewhere for a soccer game. There were no police at the game. They had 3 ushers. right? They normally, when you rent the stadium, they go, what's the pop? All right, you need this many police. There's going to be that. Let's get parking. Let's do this. It was like, these soccer guys, no one's going to come. There was 20,000 plus people at this game. And that was my first game that I saw. It was a 2-2 tie. I talk about it in the book. Actually, there's even a QR code that takes you back to the game. And so I did see that. The closest thing to a local pros where my youth coaches took me to watch a Open Cup game between, I think it was Elizabeth from New Jersey and the Greek Americans from New York City. It was in the Metropolitan Oval, which is a very famous little, iconic soccer park that still is there. It was much different then. Now it's turf and a very nice and whatever. And literally it wasn't even standing room only. It was squeeze room only, right? And it was packed. And the level of play, was extremely high. I mean, they were all new ethnics. Some they even flew in from their countries that were playing in first divisions to play in these games. And it was just a great atmosphere. And it was more the adrenaline and the I want to participate. I want that to be me than it was whether I get paid and I'd live here or I'd live there. It didn't matter to me. If I had to go to Oshkosh, I would have went to Oshkosh. I would have there was nothing that I wouldn't have done to be a great player, to be the best player I could be.
So you actually had something to visualize, to focus your energies on, that you could actually be part of, right? I mean, that game, I think, was in September of 1970. According to the New York Times, I think it was like they had like more than 22,000 people. And if anybody remembers what the Downing Stadium at Randall's Island used to be before it sort of converted, about 15 years ago to what is now Icon Stadium, right? It was to say it was falling apart it was being charitable, and obviously Cosmos stuff later on sort of called out that. But I mean, I got to think it was very similar to Pele's first game in '75, when there were probably people maybe even like looking over the Triborough Bridge and maybe not necessarily having paid for that game, because 22,000 at Randall's Island, I don't know. It seems like maybe more than a few people didn't actually have seats for that kind of crowd.
Well, let me tell you, here's the funny part that I talk about in the book is, my mom got us there by public transportation. It was me and my younger cousin, Frankie Fuchs, and it was for my birthday, right? And so public transportation from Rockland County into the city, from the city into buses, right, to get to Randall's Island. Meanwhile, the buses were like so overfull, you have no idea. Like, again, they didn't like go, okay, we're having a big event, let's add some more buses. It was like whatever. So we get out, and everybody bought the more inexpensive seats. Randall's Island was like a horseshoe, right? So behind one goal there were seats, but in the other end zone there were none, right? And obviously the sideline tickets were, let's say at the time, I don't know what they were, but our ticket was like $7, right? So the other ticket was $15 or whatever, right? So no one bought that. So in the beginning of the game, everybody was in the back behind the goal. And then a few minutes before the game, two guys got up and ran across the field from behind, behind the goal to the 50-yard line. They climbed over the wall and got up. The people saw no one stopped them. No one stopped them because they had no idea there were that many people going to come, and they weren't going to protect. And the next thing you know, it was like my mother, me, and my cousin, we were the only ones in the end zone. Everybody else had gotten up, ran across the field, right? And got into the 50-yard lines. Again, because it was before. No one had – Pele had just won the World Cup. He was like the most photographed guy in the world. He's coming for an event, and the city didn't even they had no idea, right? Like now, forget about it. They would have parades and escorts and whatever. For example, if Messi's showing up, they'll be ready for him. They were not ready for him.
All right. So the wild thing that I want you to now take us through is less than 6 years later, you're playing against that very same Pelé. How does that take us on a sort of a fairly take us on that path? Like, how do you get from that birthday event and, crowds not sitting where they're supposed to, and, in a ramshackle stadium with the greatest player in the world, to playing against him in Yankee Stadium 6 years later?
When I left high school to go to college, I had a bunch of people. It wasn't as easy for them to get your grades and things. So I had like a bunch of colleges because I was, sending me stuff to the house. But they had no way to find out what my grades were unless I applied, right, back in the day. So I just wasn't a good student. Again, I had learning disabilities. So this guy, George Visveri from Ulster County Community College, recruited me. And you would have thought I was interviewing him and he wasn't interviewing me, because I was like, oh, yeah, what kind of formation do you play? And, what kind of connections do you have with professional teams? Because I didn't want to go to college. I wanted to go to play somewhere until a professional team could find me, right? Or I could find them. And this guy, Visveri, happened to be very good friends with Al Miller. And Al Miller was the head of the head coach at the Philadelphia Adams, and they had just won the championship. And, and the guy, George, answered all my soccer questions like that. Like, he even challenged me to a game of foot tennis while we were talking. I was like, you're going to try to play me in foot tennis? Like, I was a cocky kid, right? And anyway, playing at Ulster with him, he had played soccer with the Hungarian, the 54 team, which is like one of the renowned teams. He had played under that coach, and he had studied soccer, and he was one of the federation.
Was he a colleague of Vogelsinger, maybe?
Vogelsinger, Chiselwich.
Sure.
Very good friends with Gansler, Joe Macknick. He was the first flight of coaches for the United States Soccer Federation coaching license, which I talk about in there too, because I got my license when I was 18. My C license is number 318. So this guy Visveri was special. He just passed away recently. He had just read my book. I talk a lot about him and how he influenced me and many others. He won the national championship many times. He put out just 20s, 30 pro players. Never mind how many he put in Division I and other colleges after they went to Ulster. The guy was, just amazing. One of my main mentors who helped save my life, if you will. And so I played there. And we got to the national championship. So my whole thing was get to the national championship. So we got to the national championship. And at the national championship, I was approached by a college coach. His name's Bill Nuttall. Bill has a great soccer background. He wound up being the general manager for the 94 World Cup team. So he was Bora's boss, although Bora always says he was my boss. And then Bill always says to Bora, he goes, no, Bora was my boss. I was not his boss. And anyway, Bill was coaching at FIU at the time. And he approached me and said, so I coach at FIU, and I saw you just playing in St. Louis here at the national championships, and blah, blah. And he started going into like his school and how good it would be and how I would fit in and blah, blah. And I was like kind of not hearing it, but my mom always said, listen, always listen to people, hear them out, and then be honest with them. So he ended his spiel, and I went, I'll be honest with you. I'm really looking for a pro team. So I'm not sure that your school is going to fit what I'm looking for. Like, as nice and as cocky as you can be, but as nice. And he goes, well, funny you say that. I play with the Miami Toros. I'm their goalkeeper. And I'm sitting here with the coach, but he's not allowed to approach you. But you can approach him. And I'm like, where is he? He's sitting up there in the. So I'm not even sure if I said goodbye to Bill or not. And I was sitting next to the guy, and we went through a thing, and he said, okay, I really like the way you played, and I'm not allowed to approach you. And then he asked me about your financial aid status, because if you had hardship, the league could sign you before you were a senior, but if you weren't, you couldn't. There were all rules, as there are at every league at all different times. And so that's where my connection to the pros started. And then when Greg Myers brought me in early to work in the front office and do the community relations and stuff, because I was an American kid, I spoke English, I had my coaching badge already, and he thought it would be a good fit. And he was trying to get more Americans into the league, which was hard at that time.
But being encouraged by the rules, though, the rules wanted more American players because they were bending over backwards that's beginning at that point to encourage more American players, right?
Yeah, see what happens. There were none, so then they made rules. Like the rule at one point was you have to have 6 Americans, right? But then how do you define Americans? So, like, is it a green card holder? Is it a citizen? Is it, so how many real Americans were in the rosters were few and far between. A Shep Messing, for example, but many times a Giorgio Canaglio, who became an American citizen later on, counted as one of the Americans in the Cosmo lineup, right? So they kind of got around it in some ways. But he was an American guy. He wanted to, and so he was working on trying to give American young players chances. And anyway, our first game was in Miami the next year. This was Pele's first full season in the NASL. It happens to be against the Miami Toros. What are the odds, right? So here I am, a rookie, and my first game is against the guy Pele, right? My first professional game. I signed, and I'm going to be playing against the Cosmos and Pele. So this whole North started dream. What are the odds, right? Well, I don't get in the game, but Pele was such a great ambassador, human. There was a room set up in between our locker room and his locker room where he literally would sign autographs to the other players before the game. So our coach would walk us in one at a time. I handed him my scrapbook that I had. It was more of him in my scrapbook than me. And he signed my autograph. Can you imagine a player you're about to play against in a professional game signing an autograph for you before? Anyway, I wound up not getting in the game, which was probably the first game of my life that I didn't start in, never mind not play. Even I played with youth national team. I wound up playing in a position I didn't usually play because the better players took the creative midfield in other places that I played, but then I played wing back, so it worked out, But here I didn't play. First time ever in my life. I was kind of shattered. It was televised back to New York. The game was in Miami. Fast forward, August the 10th, 1976, one of our last games of the season, we're playing the Cosmos in Yankee Stadium. And the coach never gave the lineup until in the locker room. He watched you warm up. He made sure you were, there on time, all the things. And then he'd give the final lineup. So he gives the final lineup, and I'm in the lineup, and I'm like, wow, like this is much. The stadium's, rocking. They're hanging banners off the thing with my name on it. Probably any kid I ever played against, every high school kid, my Rockland County, the Ulster, everybody was there. And it was a great night. Rained a little bit before the game, but then it cleared up and it was beautiful. And the coach, our game plan was, look, it's the end of the season. We're missing some players. The Cosmos really need this. We're going to be a little more defensive-minded. But rather than mark Pele man-to-man, I just want everybody, whenever he gets the ball, double team him, and everybody just get behind him. And, so 2 minutes into the game, he scores. 2 minutes in. I looked at the sideline. The coach is waving me over. He goes, all right, we're changing that. You're marking him man-to-man. If he goes to the bathroom, you follow him, right? So I didn't even have time to be nervous because I didn't start the game, the pregame, all of that. I was just playing my regular midfield position. I left that, and then there was literally 90 minutes of me being next to him, him kicking me kicking him, but getting the ball, no one, and I look, I never, later on in my professional career, I had coaches tell me to take people out, sick as that is. And I'm just like, I don't do that. That ain't me. You want someone else, you want to take me off? Take me off. But I'll try to get the ball from him. I'll contain him, but I'm not doing anybody. And this coach wasn't like that at all. But Pele is used to getting kicked, right? And yeah, did I foul him? Did I pull his shirt? Did I hold his shorts? Yeah, but I wasn't trying to break his leg, right? And if we knocked each other down, we picked each other up. And it was, 90 minutes, hence the name of the book, 90 Minutes with the King. It also talks about how soccer saved my life. I wasn't so lucky, and my brother didn't have soccer, and his mentors weren't good, and he had a much rougher road than I did, which is part of the book as well. Hence, how soccer saved my life. And but those 90 minutes, I remember now like they were yesterday. And at the end of the game, he, back in the day, like they would end Pele would run off a few minutes before the final whistle. If the game was like, if somebody was winning, it was pretty obvious. The referees would literally let him know, we're going to end this. And he would run off into the locker room, right? So that, look, I went to watch him play one time. They literally stripped him to his underwear. They took his shoes. The fans just went on the field, took his shoes, his socks, his shin. I saw a guy running away with his shin guard like the guy had goal in his hand, right? And the poor guy's there in his underwear. The police trying to keep it. So the safest way is he used to sneak off, like bang. Looks like he's going for a throw, and he drops the ball and runs off. So we're on the sideline, and he looks to me. He says, "You like my shirt?" I was like, "What?" And he's like holding his shirt with his two hands, right at the bottom. You like my shirt? I was like, I didn't even answer. My jaw just dropped. He tore his shirt off and handed it to me and bolted into the locker room, right? Like under the dugout in Yankee Stadium. So I rolled his shirt up thinking the fans are going to come get me, beat me up and take it, right? And I rolled it up and put it on my shirt. And a few seconds later, the game was called. And it was quite a night.
We won't talk about the final score, though.
Oh, no, we got hammered. But a lot of our English players were on loan, and if you weren't in the playoffs, they could bring you back early, and they needed to win the game to clinch a higher position. So, they were a better team anyway. But, in the beginning of the season, it was a really close game. And had all our players been there, I'm still not sure because Giorgio wasn't there for the first game. He was there for this game. He had a wonderful game. But for me, it didn't matter. I had front row seats to what I say was a magic show. Pele hit a bicycle kick. That also, I have a QR code in the book that takes you to the kick. But he said it was the nicest goal of his life, which is pretty good for a guy that scored over 1,000 goals. And I was right there when it happened. When I was marking him, that was the only goal he got. So I can tell everybody that for Pele to score on me, he has to have a bicycle kick.
All right, what's this? Oldschoolshirts.com. Fantastic. You've heard me talk on and on and on about the great folks and the great wares at oldschoolshirts.com. Like the name implies, it's old school and it's shirts, and they put them together, into what they call oldschoolshirts.com. It's like the name implies, but of course we love them primarily for their sports wear. You name the league of the past, you name the team of the past, the chances are huge that they're going to have more than one shirt and different color schemes for things that you may remember from the United Football League or the Major Indoor Soccer League or various flavors of the original XFLs, plural, or the Federal League perhaps, or maybe World Team Tennis, or maybe it was the North American Soccer League, and on and on and on. But hey, it's not just sports. It's also great cultural touchstones and memories from the past. How about the officially licensed Evel Knievel connection? How about collection? Yeah, that's what he's trying to say. Various colleges. How about dead malls of the past? Ice cream parlors, maybe even radio stations that you might remember. Hey, even there's a latest edition of the now old, Aloha Stadium commemorative shirt. All that kind of stuff and more. You will find at least a handful of shirts that you will just transport you back into your past, and you will amaze and impress your friends at the same time. It's oldschoolshirts.com, and we got a promo code for you, of course. Let's save you some dough while you go there, and its promo code is Good Seats. Good Seats. That's the promo code at oldschoolshirts.com. Promo code Good Seats for 10% off all of your purchases. Hey, P.F. Wilson and your friends at oldschoolshirts.com, thank you for your sponsorship of the show. And now, back to our conversation. All right, so let's gear shift a little bit. So you're solidly in the pros at this point. So you hopscotch through a lot of different teams and stuff. So we don't have to go through day by day in each of them, but I'm very curious about, so the Toros experience, right? So that was 1976, but then the franchise moved to Fort Lauderdale there that next season. Is that correct?
Yeah, moved to Fort Lauderdale, got a new coach. It was Ron Newman, got a new branding, and I got cut early in the season, and it was the first time, again, it was the first time, I fought my way into the lineup with the Toros to the end of the season. I played more than half the games. I got more than half the minutes. Not bad for a 19-year-old kid, the youngest kid in the NASL. And now a new coach comes in, and he wants all his players. So early in the season, I got released. It was the first time I had ever been cut from anything. I mean, you name it, whatever. So it was pretty hard to swallow, right? And, you start questioning yourself. Well, am I good enough? Can I do this? And it would have been easy to pack it in. A lot of people do pack it in when they get cut or when they get traded or when they're, when things are the darkest, if you will. And took me about 2 weeks of feeling sorry for myself. And I realized that he can take the team away from me, but he can't take my talent away. Can't take all of the hours I spent getting here. He can't take my enthusiasm, and he can't take my spirit. He can cut me, and he's welcome to do that. And Ron Newman and I were friends when it was, after, it took me a minute to swallow the pill, but over the years we were at events together and did things, and I never held it against him. He had to pick the team. He did. It was a business, right? At that time, as a 20-year-old kid, I had gone to Europe and trained in Austria in the off season. And I felt I was even better than I was a year before. But hey, certain coaches are looking for certain kind of players. Doesn't mean that you're not good enough, whatever. And I just got my bag and I went around and I wound up playing with the Cleveland Cobras in the American Soccer League, right? Because it was already, most of the NASL players already had their teams. So it was tough to get into a roster early in the season, right? And the ASL started a few weeks after us. So I wound up signing with the Cleveland Cobras.
All right, before we get to Cleveland for a second, you did though have so the Strikers, if I have this correct, right, when the Robbies essentially moved the team, before they actually debuted outdoors in '77, they actually played indoors.
Right.
You were still part of the team then.
I played with them. I was part of the team even the first couple weeks of the season, but I wasn't on the active roster, but they still owned my pass, right? And they weren't. And then when some more of the English players came in and the roster was full and they needed to get the money from somewhere to bring in the bigger names, so I got released.
So, all right, explain to me though. This might be more of a distant haze, but I'm curious about this little divot in soccer history. The Strikers played in this place called the Sportatorium. Do you remember that?
Yes, yeah. We played indoor there, and then we went to Tampa to play, and
so
it was
describe that, because this wasn't even a league at that point. This was still like a little NASL indoor kind of tournament stuff. But the Sportatorium, renowned and/or reviled for its, shall we say, basic structure, which seemed to be somewhat decent for music, but I cannot imagine that place being even at a level to house a professional soccer indoor play.
I mean, I went on. I mean, that was my first like indoor, but I wound up later on playing many years indoor soccer. So I wish that was the worst place we ever played, but we played in the Cow Palace in San Francisco one year against the San Francisco team, and you literally could smell the horse poo because it was like an arena where they did the horse shows and rodeos. So yeah, it was in Hollywood, Florida, kind of in between Fort Lauderdale and Miami, and it was the only place. And we didn't draw anything, but in all honesty, the club, it was more of a pre-season get ready than what is this indoor soccer stuff? Because there was a lot of talk about indoor soccer coming, and the NASL was trying to, dip and dab in it to see if that's the direction they would also go, so they could keep the players year round, indoor and outdoor.
Yeah, sure, and obviously we know sort of the what germinated from that. It's just curious to me that and the Sportatorium just is notorious for all kinds of other stuff. But to me it's intriguing because it was the only time that facility. And that facility was rumored to be a place for a World Hockey Association team and all that kind of stuff. The only pro game that ever played there was the Strikers, that quote unquote indoor season. All right. So let me tell you about the ASL then. All right. So getting to Cleveland, and then you played the next year with the New York Eagles. So describe to me the difference between the NASL and the ASL. And I think people need to also remember too that the boom times, or the beginning of the ascent of the NASL to sort of like, major league kind of status, was certainly on its way. And the ASL, right, what would today be known as Division II, I guess, had been around forever in many different incarnations, but was now also trying to, I guess, ride on that wave of pro soccer in this country. And but it's different, right? It didn't have the national television stuff. Well, actually, the NASL didn't either. But so describe the difference and/or the style of play and the quality of play in Cleveland and upstate New York.
What it was it really, and in a way, it's a little bit like this in youth soccer today. There was no pyramid. Listen, in the Bundesliga. The Bundesliga is the first division. The Zweite Bundes, you know what I mean? I mean, they have a pyramid. No one questions a pyramid. No one can open up today. Don't be surprised if in the next few years The USL comes out and says, we have a Division I team. MLS and us are equal, right? Like, we have a Division I league. And again, with lawsuits and legal things and all this, it's different in another country. In Brazil, there's a first division, a second division, so on, right? Everywhere else in the world, except here. And at that time, the Cleveland Cobras, I'm in Cleveland, and my ownership, nice guys, just a bunch of local ethnic guys that chipped in. I had a Hungarian general manager, Dr. John. My coach was an Austrian guy, Herbie Haller. And the ownership are like comparing themselves to the Cosmos, right? And I'm like, I don't see this ain't the same, you know what I mean? But there were some rosters in the ASL that were better and had better players than some of the NASL rosters. So it really varied from market to market and ownership to ownership. There wasn't the strict guidelines that there are obviously with MLS, but even later on in NASL just started to pull away, and the business model blew up on them. The NASL, they outspent themselves as opposed to working together to figure it out, and that's why I think the NASL failed. The business model was wrong. But the ASL was mostly in smaller markets, but not always. There was always an ASL team in New York. The New York Apollo played in Hofstra Stadium there, which is where the Cosmos played just a year or two before. So for a regular soccer fan, it was confusing, the ASL, the NASL, a pro team, and so the two leagues were existing. I'm not sure they were, in some ways, they weren't even really competing with each other if they weren't in the same market, because the NASL didn't pay much attention to the ASL. But for the most part, the biggest difference were the budgets. The NASL rosters had more money. The front offices spent more money. They had a marketing plan. A lot of the ASLs, I mean, I can tell you a bunch of, funny stories that, just show how unprofessional things were. But also, there were many NASL teams that bounced checks, didn't pay stadiums, had problems as well before they left. So it was like the growing pains of professional soccer.
But you were also getting games in, right? And that's not a bad thing for a soccer player, especially if you couldn't, you couldn't hook up with an NASL roster. So how was the quality of play? Clearly, there's some great names that played in those years in the ASL, and there was certainly some bouncing around too between leagues at that time, and coaches too. I know Eddie Firmani, for example, went over to the New Jersey Americans for a spell, and that was a news item for a day or two in the New York metro area because he was a former Cosmos coach. And so, there was a little overlap in terms of, I'm sure there was a lot of overlap in terms of play and players and that kind of stuff. Were you happy in those 2 years, or were you always trying to get to the back to the NASL, or maybe
Look,
I
used to have players that would say, I'm a professional player. I'm not playing indoor. And I'm like, listen, bro, if you ain't getting paid, you ain't professional.
Right.
So you can sit around and wait for a next game, or you can go play any game see, I didn't care. It didn't matter to me, right? Like, I wanted to play. And equally, I wanted to promote the game, because it really, and I got the bug working in the Toro front office, because I used to go in with the coach a lot and see the marketing lady. And I did so many I went and did everybody's clinics. And guys would come to me and go, hey, Tom, I got a clinic. I don't want to go. You want to go? I go, yeah, I'll go. I was so happy to sign an autograph like when I was 19, So how are you going to build the sport if you're not out there playing, coaching, promoting, right? And so I always just wanted to play. So whether I was playing of course, would I rather play in the NASL than the ASL? Surely. But in some cases, there were players in the ASL that were making more money than they would have got in the NASL, right? Because again, there was no like maximum player budget or whatever. If the owner wanted the guy and he thought he was the best goalkeeper and he bought him, and the goalkeeper was going to make $8,000 a month instead of $4,000 a month back then, they went and took it, right? It was like whatever the best deal was. So, listen, Eusebio played in the ASL. There were many great players that played in the ASL in the lower division. So, to me, I love being on a team. I love promoting my sport. Look, I wanted to be the best player in the world when I was growing up, right? And that was my goal. My goal was to be a professional player and be the best player in the world. Well, you know what? I never became the best player in the world. But I can look back and go, hey, I trained as hard as I could. I tried as hard as I could. I did my best. So I can look myself in the mirror and go, hey, you did what you can do. You move on. You hope the sport gets better. The players make more money. There's more opportunity for everybody. And look where we are. I mean, back then, who would have imagined that a professional team in last place would have more social media followers than in the most NFL, right? Like, it was never even like they'll never compete at any level about anything with any of the other professional sports. And soccer right now, let me tell you, we're right up there. We are no longer in the back of the bus. We're driving the bus. And that's from participation, that's from revenue, that's from marketing, that's from sponsorship. Internationally, forget about it. So, the MLS has done a great job. This Apple TV thing changes things. And back in the day, there were 2 leagues. Now there are a bunch of leagues too. So I'm happy that I played for so long. I played with so many different teams. I met so many great humans. I played it with and against great guys. And I'm a lucky soccer human. I've been blessed by the soccer gods.
All right, I want to get your final thoughts on the state of pro and all that kind of stuff. But before we wrap up your playing career, though, I just want to ask, and I think you're kind of hinting at it. So you're talking about money, right? You're talking about the ASL, but also my suspicion is that you were part of a breed of player that was taking advantage of being able to play outdoors and indoors as this major indoor soccer league thing got really started, right? So it looks to me like you were playing ASL outdoors and literally becoming kind of quite the phenom in the MISL. And there's some very famous pictures of you, one in particular doing some of those said clinics with the ill-fated Hartford Hellions. So do I have that right? You were kind of, if you will, getting 2 paychecks to play year round that way?
I like I said, because I'd have a guy go, that's not soccer. I go, you ain't getting paid for 3 months. When are you going to go collect? You go collect unemployment? I go, I am going to play, right? So I played indoor, outdoors. And to top it off, I always, when I negotiated my contract, I always worked in the front office. So not only did I play on all of those teams, they paid me an extra salary to run the clinics and help with the marketing and sales department in the front office of the teams.
So you were you're all in.
Oh, I was getting the player. So because who better would know? Because the last thing a player wants, some like intern comes in and drops an envelope in your, at your locker and then they open it up. They go, I got an appearance this weekend. My wife got a wedding, blah, 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 there. So I handled all that, right? So I knew a guy like Shep Messing, we sent him to the TV. We sent him to the big political things. These other guys, we could send out to, one of the owner's kids' birthday parties, or to a youth, an elementary school assembly. Or I take the guys that can't speak and bring them to their community so we could connect the Polish community with the Polish players, or the Latin community with the Latin players. So I did that from inside. It got to the point where when they went to go write a marketing or sponsorship, I sat with them and helped put the inventory together, what they could sell from the front office. So, and those skills of working in the front office and play. So literally, let's say we had training at 9 o'clock in the morning, right? Let's say 10 o'clock, but you had to be in the locker room by 9, getting ready. So I'd go to the locker room, train, I'd eat lunch, and then I'd go in the office till 5, 6, 7 o'clock at night. If I left to go do clinics or whatever, or drive players somewhere, plan all of the marketing things for the club, make sure it didn't conflict with the coach's schedule. And then I'd go to the indoor team and I'd be doing the same thing with them. So I wound up connecting with the soccer communities so that we could connect the team, the ticket sales, the marketing, everything together, which was kind of a unique thing. Sometimes, sometimes some of the players didn't understand, right? Like how I could be out doing all those clinics and still show up for training. And well, I just really felt that it was part of our duty to sell the sport to the country, right? To our people. I wanted soccer to be an American sport.
What can you explain the difference between the indoor game and the outdoor game playing? So the adjustment, and frankly, the leagues, ASL versus MISL. It seemed like at the time, as you were bouncing back and forth, MISL was, shall we say, a hell of a lot more ascendant, perhaps, than the ASL was outdoors. So mental adjustment, physical adjustment, and frankly, at some point, you have no time to rest during the season.
Yeah, no, there was no rest, but the biggest look, and the leagues changed. It was ASL at one point. It was a USL, right? The United Soccer League, that I played with the Fort Lauderdale Sun, right? And the ASL had kind of fallen away. The NASL was not there for a minute. And I went and played with the Fort Lauderdale Sun outdoor, and then I played indoors. I played with first with the Pittsburgh Spirit, then the Hartford Hellions. And really, to me, listen, I grew up playing on the cement in front of Cinema 45, the movie theater. So all the guys complaining about shin splints or playing on the turf indoors, it never even bothered me the slightest bit, right? I just wanted to play. And the biggest difference between indoor and outdoor was that indoor, you really needed to have a lot more technical skill. Like there were a lot of players outdoors that couldn't also play indoor just because of their style of play. That they took too long with the ball. Maybe one of the reasons they were even in a roster is because they were such a good header that it made a big difference to the coach and his lineup. And that just wasn't relevant indoors at all. A lot of players that were very successful indoors, some of the top scorers, didn't have the same, or in some cases, they had zero success outdoors, but they did great indoors, with the exception of Jungle. Steve Jungle, who was the best indoor scorer ever in the history, like Lord of all indoors. He was a good player outdoors, but not nearly the category of, player that he was indoors. Indoors, he was just completely another level, right? And everybody knew that. I don't think anybody ever even questioned that. And outdoors, he was a good player, but he wasn't the man. So it was a different set of skills to be the player, and actually mine were okay for both. I was pretty disciplined. I was always in shape. Listen, knock on wood, I never got injured badly. And I think part of that was because I was always in shape, because I went from indoor to outdoor, outdoor back to indoor. Sometimes it was a week or two in between, but I went and trained anyway. So the mentality of indoor soccer is a little different because of the shift. You're on for 3 minutes and you're off, and you run on and you got to shift with the guy. And it's a lot more, the tactics are like hockey, more than the outdoor game where you got to sustain yourself for 90 minutes.
And the leagues, though, they're very different, though. ASL, MISL. I mean, I would imagine some of your front office exposure was a little bit more, shall we say, highly valued in the MISL, which in many respects was aiming to be big time, right? Earl Foreman and Ed Tepper. And this was like major arena stuff, right? I mean, they were, and television and the St. Louis Steamers and all that kind of stuff, right? That was, and the Arrows, and it was a big deal for a number of years. I got to think you were exposed, and I'm guessing in the front office or lending a hand there too.
Well, how about this? When I moved with the New York Arrows, the Kansas City Comets were owned by the same guy. He wound up buying the New York franchise because the league
right?
fell.
Wiki Brothers.
Well, they didn't own it, but the same owner brought them and brought. So my front office had the Lewicki brothers. So I answered directly to Todd Lewicki and Tim Lewicki, and talk about a sports marketing class, degree, college experience. These guys, I mean, think about it. I mean, the Lewicki family probably are the most successful launching of professional sports in our country at any level, with any kind of, whether it's hockey, basketball, building arenas, LA, and I'm sitting in the front office having coffee with Todd every morning. And my job was connecting the community relations and the marketing together with the ticket sales department and his brother who was doing our TV. So I got behind the scenes experience of doing those things, which later on, when I was the president of the Fort Lauderdale Strikers, which, by the way, was the team I got cut from 40 years earlier. Right. Then I wound up being the president of the club. But those were the kind of experiences. So look, you're a player. You're making whatever you're making. You train from 10 to 11:30, 12. You go out to eat with your boys. Now you're home the rest of the day. Not me. I was in the office, right? Learning the trade, learning the marketing, learning the front office stuff. So for me, it was just, again, it was like soccer was like a fix of heroin for me. Like I just loved doing whatever it was I could, any part of the game. And having the Lewicki brothers it didn't get better than that.
All right. So you're mentioning a whole bunch of white whales that we're looking for. I'm looking for any Lewicki brother at some point. And it could be Terry talking about the broadcast and stuff or whatever. And Jungle, of course, is also a white whale for us too, for his many memories. All right, let's segue then and cul-de-sac then, because you have your life to go back to today. The last thing you want to do is spend like 7 more hours talking to me. But
I'm sorry about that. Yeah, I do go on too much.
No, I would. I'm worried about you running out of steam. So it's clear that that exposure to these front office experiences, being out in the community, the grassroots level. I mean, you have a much more holistic understanding of what is needed for this quote unquote professional soccer thing. And I'm sure once your playing career ended in the mid to late 1980s, you also had to be a little befuddled by sort of what all this accumulated knowledge in the midst of essentially what had collapsed professionally, right? I mean, there were some successor smaller leagues and that kind of stuff. But as we've talked about many times with many guests, the late 80s, early 90s, right, was a very dark period for people who had grown up, played, were fans of the professional game. And they kind of almost wondered if they'd been essentially abandoned and if it was ever going to come back again. How do you pick up from that? How do you then take those skills? And then what are the things that you did over the years subsequently Because you've done quite a bit in professional soccer management stuff. It's clear that those skills came in handy.
Well, first of all, I'll never forget the day it was in the USA Today newspaper. Remember the USA Today paper when it was always
it's still around, but sure. But back in the day, it was quite the thing, right? In the early 80s, it was like the go-to sports page, right?
Yeah, and it was kind of national, so it wasn't just what was going on in Pittsburgh or wherever. And I was playing with the Louisville Thunder. Never forget this.
The American Indoor Soccer Association.
Yes, we won the championship actually, and one of the players on the back page of USA Today, there was an article that said Cosmos folded. Soccer was finished. And, usually you do a little roundo, 5v2, whatever, we're doing this. And the guy says that. We all stop and run over to the guy because he was injured. So that was, he was on the side, right? And this was a pre-warm-up. The coach hadn't come out of his locker room yet. So we all run over to the newspaper. It's like, oh, my God. Oh. And I like that day, like for the rest of the week, the next 2-3 days, I couldn't even kick a ball. And I was at the end of my career. So, and again, I don't have a college degree, and I don't have another trade. I only know soccer, but I know it inside out. I don't just know playing. I have my coaching licenses. I've got front office experience. I got marketing, whatever. Anyway, so I was shattered. Here I am in Louisville, Kentucky, and the New York Cosmos folded. I'm like, pressed. That weekend we had a clinic set in Oldham County, Kentucky. Yeehaw! Right? And I get out of the car. I have another player with me. We're supposed to do an appearance, hand out flyers, talk to people, kiss babies, whatever, right? They have a youth soccer thing going. And we get out, we park at the top of the hill. It's like at a school. And as we walk over like the first hill to where there was like a level of fields at the bottom of the hill, as we came over the hill, and I had just been saying to myself the last 2 or 3 days, soccer's dead. It's over. And as we came over the hill, I got like I'm getting now emotional. And I'm looking out, and there's all these little kids running. The moms got their chairs on the side. This is in the middle of nowhere, Kentucky. There had to be 1,500 people there. They were on the sidelines. And you know what? They didn't even know who the New York Cosmos were. Soccer lives on. Right? What was planted is there, and those trees, those kids, the game is growing, and it will grow, right? And I got excited. I realized that it wasn't over, that there was much more ahead. And that those experiences, that complete negative, and then looking at the kids, and you know what I mean? And it was like a breath of fresh air. And I knew that was it. We were going to be. And so that we are here where we are today. And, what's going on is I'm not surprised at all.
You have to be surprised, though, you mentioned the reincarnation of the NASL and the Fort Lauderdale Strikers and stuff, right? But the advent of World Cup 94 and the debut of Major League Soccer in 1996. And even those fits and starts in the early aughts, right? Success was still, even after all of those, not guaranteed. You must have to be gobsmacked, though, by what you see today. We're recording this the day after MLS Cup and, a jam-packed lower.com stadium in Columbus, Ohio, of all places. And, another championship for the crew. And, it's still growing, so to speak, but soccer specific stadiums and, a $1 billion, streaming deal with one of the biggest tech companies on the planet, and the sheer availability of the sport on television, every form of media in this country. I mean, you'd have to be locked up, I guess, back in the late 80s, early 90s to think that would even be a thing 30 years later.
I mean, when I stopped playing, right, in around 86, I was still hesitate whether they're going to play or not play. I played in this game with Nate Kubias, like a world all-star game. He brought me down there. Not that I'm a world all-star, but I was an American guy that played with Nate. He wanted to show the people Americans could play. But I started this company, and I said to myself, I used to go in and meet with a marketing company with the front office of a team. And for example, we go to Procter & Gamble, or we go to Coca-Cola or whatever, and you sit down and you'd make a presentation. And I said, well, the only thing I don't have is the pro team, but I can provide clinics. I can hire professional players to come as guest people for their brands. So I started a company that was pretty much did everything the pro teams did, except didn't have a pro team, right? And it was called Soccer Marketing and Promotions. And then I realized that there was a big opportunity in the Hispanic market. Since I was in Miami, it was obvious. If you're in Miami, you can't even get lunch without speaking Spanish. And so I started a company that was bilingual. It was called Se Habla Football. We speak football, right? So, and we started doing grassroots soccer events at every level. And then I was hired by the 94 World Cup people to be a spokesperson. I went around to all the cities, and we did tournaments. We did everything. So I knew that the potential was there. And again, we started off the beginning of this podcast talking about how there were little ethnic groups that, the Greeks and Queens and, the Scots down in Kearney, and that how did they get together? Well, now with social media and with Apple TV and now there's a way to connect those dots, right? So it's just getting bigger and bigger, and it's off the charts now. And so that's the good news. The bad news is some people are just in it for the money. Where back in the day, if you were in it because you loved it. You were in it because you had a passion for it. You were in it because it was in your blood. Today, there are a lot of people that are in it just because they want to make a buck, right? And it's okay. Making a buck's fine. I mean, pay to play soccer for the kids, it's a must, right? But you always got to take two things in consideration that unfortunately not everybody does. One of them is this good for the game? And is this good for the people in the game? And those two questions aren't always asked. A lot of people just care, is it good for me? How much money am I getting? And, because it came from a mom and pop shop. So today, it's a multi-billion-dollar happening, right? So I just ask people that are in positions to just keep in mind what is good for the soccer people and what is good for the sport itself. And I think the long run, the health of the sport will be much better.
All right, let me wrap up with sort of some more pointed question around that, and then I'll let you promote, of course. And then we'll promote the book, of course, before, during, and after all this stuff. So
no problem. Thank you so much.
No, please. Oh my God, this has been absolutely cool. So you may be uniquely qualified to maybe have an opinion about this, right? So there are a couple of sort of things that are evolving. You mentioned the $1 billion and all that kind of stuff, and the valuations, and that's just pro sports, which I would argue is maybe, I don't know, maybe nearing a bubble of some sort, because it just seems to keep going up, and soccer is along for that ride. But specifically, there are a couple of interesting dynamics that could change things, right? Or upset the apple cart, shall we say, right? So nobody questions MLS and its growth and the soccer specificity and 30 teams. Is 30 teams too much? Good question. The USL, you mentioned them before, right? Not necessarily embraced or well coordinated, or even in conversation seemingly anymore with MLS. as MLS now is creating its own Division II kind of thing with MLS Next and that kind of stuff. Yet you've got some great markets and some great teams in this USL pyramid. But then also, too, you mentioned the second incarnation of the North American Soccer League. I think a lot of people forget the fact that there is still this court case wending its way through the system of the second NASL, challenging the MLS for restraint of trade. Clearly, the NASL doesn't exist anymore in its second go around, but it's still a very lively court case that could. I guess the question in there is, how do you see all these things ending, so to speak? Like, I don't know how much further the balloon can get inflated. And then also these other issues that sort of, maybe being the greed maybe taking over for the structure and the betterment of the game here in the States.
Well, let me go back just quick to when I was talking about the power and the money, I wasn't really referring to the pro game. I was referring to the amateur, like the youth soccer, the pay to play more.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
Sure.
See where the pro, it's different. Hey, you invest whatever, $500 million in a stadium and you're putting money into the community, you're hiring people. That's a different issue than if you're a local youth club and you're trying to tell a 13-year-old girl she needs to fly from Miami to Atlanta for a game. Meanwhile, she flew over 100 teams that she could have played against, right? You know what I mean? But you're doing that for the wrong reason. So that's really what I meant. The pro part of it, I personally, absolutely in this country, do not believe, and I can debate with whoever about ever, in relegation. And to me, that never would have worked here. We would have never been where we are with it. And I find it to be a ridiculous, even conversation. People say to me, why? So a couple of years back, we're at the coaches convention. Guy, what are you talking about? What do you mean? I go, all right, who came in last place in MLS this year? Oh, well, who was it? It was DC. And DC was in a position right at that point. And again, I don't have their books or know their numbers, but just give me an idea. They were trying to get out of the old stadium. They were about to build a new stadium. They weren't spending a lot of money on players because you weren't going to sell season tickets to this stadium because you're really looking ahead to the stadium in front of that, right? The new one coming in and rebranding and all, right? And all the business things you should do when you're in this situation. So DC was in last place, right? Now, who won? I said to the guys who were arguing with me at the coaches convention, it was like 10 guys arguing with me. It has to be relegated. They do it everywhere else, right? I go, all right. Who won the USL? The Cosmo. No, the Cosmo. No. First of all, they couldn't tell me who, right? It was the team from San Francisco that won the Division II that year, the USL. Or whatever it was that year. It was the NASL / whatever it was, because it was still being mixed up. And they had been in business for 8 months. They didn't draw. They didn't have a stadium. But day one, they went out of business. They were already out of business. This was just a few months later. They already had quit. They packed it in. The owners left. So that team, all of the years that DC United spent investing in soccer, being part of the league, winning the championship, bringing in players, developing coaches, their academy, blah, blah, blah. They go down, and up comes these guys who got in last year for $1 million and folded in their first year. Please, right? People, it just doesn't. And listen, I had too many crazy owners. I've seen all different levels. The MLS, it's like the billionaires, that people that had NFL franchises that I'm sure if they could go back to the early days of NASL, they would run it the way they're running the MLS franchises now, because they a lot that they took, that they learned from running those franchises, they brought that to the MLS. So to me, we also don't live in a country. We live in a continent. Remember, Germany does that, and they're the size of Texas. For us to have, to have the same system as big and as wide as we are, it doesn't really, I don't believe in that. And again, everybody has their own opinion. I guess there's no right or wrong way until they see if it ever works. But and I used to argue, I worked at Traffic Sports, which was, they bought my company at the end that I worked there with, and I used to argue with those guys all the time about that.
Yeah, I think some would also argue too that, MLS is still a centralized owner-operator structure, right? It's not sort of free franchise kinds of things. Arguably, some owners may want to, chafe and try to go on their own and do it better than, say, the league. But arguably that artificial structure, right? That centralized ownership, right? That's what saved the league, right? With Anschutz basically buying a whole bunch of franchises when it was looking not so great, and then they sold them off, if you will. But yeah, I mean, you wonder if you removed some of that artificiality, that centralized. I mean, either that's the future, right? Centralized ownership of league, but then on the playing perspective, it may actually be a bit more restrained in terms of like how active you can be in the open markets and that kind of stuff. So there's some interesting ways it could go. There's no question, though, that this structure over the last 25 plus years has kept the league growing, and the valuations of all the participants have grown too. You just wonder, though, what the next level of that looks like. I mean, 30 teams, that's a lot. I mean, even Major League Baseball doesn't have 30 teams, or NHL or some of these. I don't know. It does feel a little frothy, though, at this moment. To see these valuations, I just, it's hard to fathom where much more money is going to come from, and or if private equity entities who are becoming more involved in these kinds of things won't, I don't know, affordability of tickets. I went to a couple of Nashville games this year for the League's Cup, and I was looking at a jersey, and the stadium was $129. I mean, I don't know. It just feels like it's getting a little out of reach, I think, for the average fan. I just worry. That's all. You know what? Maybe I, and maybe you too, have the right to worry, because we've been through some of the dark times where we saw, an ascended NASL basically pop and go nowhere, right? Nobody wants to see that again. At least if, for people who are so passionate about the game as you are and I am. I don't know. Maybe it's needless worry, but I don't know. It doesn't feel like it's sustainable for too much longer as the money keeps inflating.
Well, I think one of the biggest, after the '94 World Cup, there was the Federation put together a big powwow. It was a research, a talk, discussion, brought a lot of people in before they started the Pro League. And one of the things that everybody agreed on, or that the experts came to the conclusion of, was that you can't really do it unless you have a specific soccer stadium. So he who has land is king, ultimately, is what was turned out. And, if you come in, you buy a franchise, for example, and right now in USL, you buy a franchise, and whatever you pay, whatever they say you're paying now, $5 million, whatever it is, and you get into it and you try to do it like they did in San Francisco, and it doesn't work, and 2 years in and 3 years, and now you're 25 in the hole, and now you're like, your wife looks at you and you're like, look, you're 25 million in the hole. I don't see it being any different next year. You're going to be 35 million in the hole. You just go, I'm out. Take the franchise, sell it to someone for, what can I sell it for? If a brand new one's going for $5 million, I'll sell you mine for $4 million, whatever, $5 million, whatever it is, you're out. But when you own a $500 million stadium, and you're already into the community, and now you're doing you ain't going anywhere. It ain't so easy to throw your hands down and walk home crying, right? So in a way, they're committed. They're all in. Could the business model change? Yeah, but I don't think it can ever go away again.
Well, coming from you, I hope that's right. And it seems like that's a credible way to land this conversation. The good news is that the sport is probably, larger than it's ever been before on all levels. So you'd like to think that at least the root structure is much more solid, should even on the top level or the mid level, or as the pro game kind of sort of sorts itself out. There's probably more infrastructure, shall we say, across the entire landscape than there ever was before. And even if there was a shakeup or some kind of diversion from the levels of the pro game, you'd like to think that there's, and through pioneering efforts by people like you, that those seeds have grown into some very strong redwoods.
Here's an example. 94, right? 94 is coming, 93. And again, I was a spokesperson, so I was all on top of it. The World Cup here. By the way, I've been to 9 World Cup finals in the stadium myself. So I'm right before World Cup's coming here in 94, right? There's an article here in the Herald. Are these people crazy? Are they out of their mind? They're trying to sell tickets in a strip. In other words, if you were going to buy tickets in Orlando, you couldn't just buy the Holland-Mexican game. You had to buy all 3 games that were going on in Orlando, right? That's how U.S. Soccer and the World Cup 94 committee decided how they were going to bundle their tickets. You would have thought, they were like, are they out of their minds? This is a Miami Herald. They're educated. And are they out of their minds? Where do they think they are? They're going to be playing in empty stadiums. They're going to wish they had 24 hours after the initial sale. They sold more tickets than anyone ever did to any event ever to this day, period. Right? We had I worked for Coca-Cola. I did stuff for McDonald's. I went all over the place during World Cup. I didn't even come home. I was just out. And in Coca-Cola, I was in the Coca-Cola headquarters in Atlanta on a stage in front of their national sales heads from all over the country, all over the area, right? Like even the zones, Caribbean, whatever. And I was like trying to explain to them how important their tickets, because they had a bundle of tickets, and how important the World Cup was going to be to their customers, because no one believed it. Like they didn't know. The supermarket in Wyoming was like, what are you talking about? Like the guy in suburban Long Island was like, what are you talking about? And all of a sudden it came, and we weren't even ready for it. And it hit us. It was now 2026. Oh, everybody's ready. Everybody's going to know. Everybody's going to be aware. People are already trying to figure out how to get tickets. I'm on the committee here in Miami for our venue. And it is going to be off the charts, a shot in the arm for everybody. And can there be a USL and an MLS? Sure, there's going to be different. Should a little town in Wyoming or Birmingham, Alabama or something be able to host a minor league professional soccer team? For sure. And the women's game is going great as well. So, I just see it going up. I would like the people at the youth level to be a little more realistic about what it takes. But I just see it a really bright future.
All right, I loved having that chat with Tom, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. The book is a fun and must read if you're any kind of soccer fan, or even curious about what soccer was like back in the day, as well as what it has become. You will enjoy the narrative and the memoirs of Tom Mulroy, our guest this week. It is called 90 Minutes with the King: How Soccer Saved My Life. And again, it has that iconic picture on the front of him defending the great Pelé from that game on August 10th of 1976 as a member of the Miami Toros against the vaunted New York Cosmos in Yankee Stadium in the great Pelé, the game where Pelé had that memorable bicycle kick. You can find that on YouTube. This book is a great narrative and a wonderful and some wistful memories for sure. And you can get it wherever fine books are found. Perhaps you want to walk down the street to your local bookseller and get it or order it that way. But of course, the most convenient way and maybe the way you can help tip your hat in our general direction with some admiration and a couple of shekels of love, we'd appreciate that by going to our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just search up this episode number 333 and you will find a convenient link or 2 or 3 or 7 to this book. You can get it from our friends at Amazon in hardcover and or Kindle versions. And while you're online or on the website, check out all of our other episodes. Tons of great soccer ones for sure. Just a panoply of great interviews and conversations and more to come. The book, by the way, is forwarded by Shep Messing, another guy we'd love to get on the show. We've had a number of entreaties over the years and somewhat still reluctant, but we'll hopefully get him at some point. We have his book, The Education of an American Soccer Player, sitting on our shelves, just waiting to be discussed in a previous or in an upcoming episode someday, we hope. So let's keep our fingers crossed that will come into be. Our website, as I said, goodseatsstillavailable.com. The best place, of course, though, to ensure that you get every single stinking episode that we do here is to make sure that you follow or subscribe to us wherever you get podcasts. You should have no problem finding our feeds wherever you get those. If you do, send us a note. We'll try to help you figure it out. But I think you have a hard time trying to not find us wherever you might get your podcasts. Our email address for those kinds of issues, as well as just other stuff, is hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. You can follow us on various socials. You'll find us on X/Twitter at GoodSeatsStill. You will find us on Instagram and Threads and where else? On Facebook. And you will find us also, other places at Good Seats Still Available. That's our handle there. And what else? Our thanks, of course, as always, to the great Jerry Payne Audio Excellence. Thank you, kind sir. And if you want to follow Tom elsewhere on his socials, let's see, a bunch of different places you can follow him. You can follow him on Instagram and on X at the handle @SoccerTomMulroy. @SoccerTom, Tom Mulroy, Mulroy. And you can also follow him directly on his website at soccertom.com. So check all of those out. And again, we appreciate your listening. Fun conversation this week. Hopefully some more to come for you in the weeks to follow. And I appreciate it to no end, your support of the show. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourselves. And until next week, we bid you a fond farewell.